What is the toughest position to play in the NFL? I think to many of us, the answer would probably be quarterback, where you're in charge of commanding an entire offensive unit, or on the other side of the ball, a position like cornerback, where you're responsible for reacting to the league's most athletic players with rules that continue to evolve against you. Now, these answers are both incredibly valid, but if you ask Melvin Gordon what the toughest position to play in the NFL is, his answer is running back, and it's not even close. In his own words, it, quote, literally sucks. Gordon's argument that the running back position is the worst to play in the NFL is nothing new in recent years. After all, with the evolution of the running backs don't matter movement sparked by analytics, we've seen the position get less and less love year after year, to the point where the position that so many of us fell in love with the game through watching has now become an afterthought on so many teams attempting to build championship level rosters. And you know what? Melvin Gordon's right, even if some might say he's the wrong messenger here. It does suck what's happened to the running back position. It sucks that these players, who are second only to the quarterback in terms of how much you hold the ball in an NFL offense, get so little credit for what they do. Their value is highest when their salaries are at their lowest, and when it comes time for that second contract, that's often when we see these players get dumped, especially if they have a history with injuries. And we all know this to generally be true, but very few people know the actual numbers at play here, the ones that indicate just how mistreated the running back position has been. With the current rookie wage scale, the current format of the NFL draft, and the way that players evolve in the modern NFL, these running backs have truly been getting the short end of the stick. So let's get to the numbers side of this to really understand what's going on. Now, per Tage Seth of the Sumer Sports Podcast, from 2011 to 2023, if you look at positional contract APY growth, aka how much these players are getting paid per year, the salary cap has gone up 87%. Quarterback contracts have grown 189%. Tight end contracts have grown 130%. If you go down the list, every position in the league has seen decent positional contract growth, but the running back contract has grown 13%. That is drastically smaller than every other position on the list. Furthermore, as Tage Seth chose to label this, the second contract nature of things makes it so that most positions in the NFL see the peak of their athleticism, the peak of their football talents, and the peak of their total revenue earned come in their second contract. And when you think about it, this makes sense. Most quarterbacks take a couple of years to fully find comfort in the pocket and understand the game at the NFL level. Tight ends always take a couple of years to break out. Linebackers can't just come in and be phenomenal right off the bat. That's just how it works. But there are two exceptions to this. One is wide receiver, where especially these days, the agility, speed, and hands of these young players makes it so that their transition into the NFL is somewhat seamless. And the other is running back. But the difference between running backs and receivers is injuries, of course. For running backs, the general peak of the position surprisingly comes in at about 22 or 23 years old. After that, they either demand too much money or they have too much wear and tear, or both, making it so that teams try to pounce on these players early before they need to pay them money and try to win with these young guys who don't take up too much of the salary cap. Just look at the Falcons drafting Bijan Robinson, the New York Giants franchise tagging Saquon Barkley, or the Cowboys, and how much they regret the money that they gave Ezekiel Elliott. So to put it simply, the modern functionality of the running back position in the NFL makes it so that these guys are drastically underpaid during their careers, seeing as they peak during their rookie contracts. So how do we fix this? Well, as Eric Eager, again of the Sumer Sports Podcast, laid it out, we have a couple similar options here. The first would be to do away with the rookie wage scale and allow running backs to demand more money coming into the league. But as Eager points out, this would likely just cause running backs to never be drafted high, which has its own set of problems. So the other solution, which is admittedly far more drastic and likely completely unrealistic, is to abolish the NFL draft altogether. Now, hold on, I need to slow down, right? Why are we jumping to the most extreme measure? What if the running back position just held out of the draft by itself? Couldn't that work? Yes, I suppose it could, but what's the fun in that? I want to explore what the draft actually means to the league and the ways in which it impacts players of every position. Not to mention, if we're talking realisticness, abolishing the rookie wage scale would probably be the most likely thing to happen, not convincing an entire position group going into the NFL to go woke and unionize. That would be pretty difficult to make happen. Change is much more likely to come from the top down. So let's go to the biggest change, and let's start with the history of the NFL draft. All the way back in 1934, after the NFL instituted its waiver system, Philadelphia Eagles co-owner Bert Bell felt as if his team was at a disadvantage in signing top players. Without the monetary advantage that other clubs had, the Eagles and other teams with fewer resources had little chance of attracting impact players. So, at a 1935 league meeting, Bell proposed that the NFL hold an annual player draft to level the playing field and make sure that every franchise remained financially viable. League owners voted unanimously to adopt his proposal, setting up the first NFL draft in 1936. So on February 8th of that year, inside of a Philadelphia Ritz-Carlton hotel, NFL clubs selected from a pool of only 90 players. There were no formal scouting departments, no agents, and no 24-hour sports media coverage. The list of eligible players was compiled from newspaper reports, visits to local colleges by team executives, and recommendations to front office personnel. Now, what's important to remember about this era is that it was, of course, pre-salary cap, meaning that forcing players' hands to go to a certain club, so to speak, was far more effective than the previous monetary system that was in place. Now, here's the thing. All the way back then, the draft didn't exactly impact the league as expected. In fact, historian Craig R. Conan found that the college draft had no immediate impact on bringing parity to the league. Its most important effect was stopping the bidding wars for talent, thereby causing a general reduction to player salaries. So yeah, all the way back then, in a smoke-filled room in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel with a bunch of rich white millionaires, this capitalist raffle draw did not impact team parity, only the salaries of the workers of the league. And this topic is worth its own video, but for the most part, parity didn't come to the NFL until the actual salary cap was created, assuring that teams cannot outspend one another based on the size of the markets in their towns. But okay, the salary cap was instituted about 30 years ago. Doesn't the draft help with parity now? Surely now, with the parity that we have in the league, the draft is a good thing, and it helps that teams like, say, the Bengals got the first dibs on Joe Burrow, or the Jaguars got dibs on Trevor Lawrence. Theoretically, yes, and I won't argue this too much, because we do know that it helps for bad teams to get high picks. That's pretty simple. But I will say that half the time, we really don't know what we're doing. I mean, Patrick Mahomes was picked behind Mitch Trubisky. We all know that Tom Brady wasn't exactly the first pick in an NFL draft. In other words, the first pick doesn't exactly mean everything. But also, and more importantly, there are ways to assure that bad teams get priority in, say, a bidding war. So the draft isn't the only way to ensure that bad teams get a bit of a boost going into the next season. Anyways, to the next point. Aside from the draft being questionable in terms of the balance that it brings to the league, it also has been questioned for the way that it treats player independence. As a matter of fact, as Bomani Jones pointed out in his video on abolishing the NFL draft, the courts on more than one occasion have stated that the NFL draft is an illegal restraint of trade. The only thing keeping the draft alive has been the players on multiple occasions who preserve it in their labor agreements with the league in exchange for other commodities like, no joke, free drinking water at practice. Furthermore, if we're talking player independence, at this point we all know that players deserve more than the rookie contracts that they make going into the league, and in a sense, the draft event is a 3-day extravaganza of billionaires saving money on the help, as Jones put it. Jones described it as televised wage suppression with commercial breaks and a jingle. And he's not far off. We can talk about the Combine, which has been called into question before. Have a listen to this clip.
I was in the NFL Combine, and you know what it feels like? It feels like you're in a cattle auction, and you have this random number slapped on you. You are paraded around in your underwear, and scouts are standing there with a clipboard sizing you up. There is not another job interview anywhere on earth like the NFL Combine.
The former general manager of the Giants referred to the Combine as a livestock show, saying it's dehumanizing, but it's necessary. If we're going to buy them, we ought to see what we're buying. And to me, the part of this that I find extra disturbing is that the NFL, of course, stands for not for long. So the majority of these players that are getting lined up and evaluated on their physicals with a number slapped on their back are not going to be in the league by the time that second contract hits, meaning when they do get paid, it's not as much as they could be making, and then they're done before they know it. But I'm sure some might say that I'm missing the point. Of course we can give players more money in the draft. I think most people are in favor of the league being more pro-player. That's not exactly the point of the draft. The point of the draft is to assure that teams in, say, Buffalo, New York, get talent at the same rate that teams in Los Angeles, California do. Players shouldn't exactly be able to get a say on where they want to play when some locations are objectively favored over others. And to this, I say, I'm not so sure that that's necessarily true. First off, I have a feeling that most rookies going into the NFL simply want a chance to prove themselves and are happy going wherever offers them the most money, no matter where it is. But also, have a listen to this soundbite from the Athletic Football Podcast in an episode about salary cap, where Robert Mays of The Athletic and PFF's Brad Spielberger discuss a team like the Buffalo Bills, who of course play in a more undesirable location than other NFL teams. The relevance here is that these guys are discussing the salary cap specifically, which in theory would be the type of mechanism that would replace the NFL draft, some sort of cap-oriented money pool that teams can use on acquiring rookies coming into the league.
Kind of makes sense. And then the second thing, and this could be a whole podcast, but I think the Buffalo Bills sat down when the new regime came in, and they said, the number one way a team in Buffalo, New York can compete and can win in this league with the salary cap league is, let's spend as much money as possible on things that are not under the salary cap. I've been told players have signed there because of their training facility. I've been told players have signed there because of the accommodations they make for the players, yada yada yada. And it's not inside my purview, but I think it trickles back. You see guys take pay cuts there. You see guys take veteran discounts there. And I think it's not just because I want to play with Josh Allen. He's awesome. I think it's the entire organization buying it.
I can tell you with 100% certainty that conversation happened when the new regime took over because of that exact reason. And when you were saying this idea of guys taking money early and how that can just get you so far ahead of the game, that is where some of these hard to define elements of team culture start to actually manifest in real ways. The other very good example of this was what the Vikings were doing for that 3 or 4 year stretch where everyone was signing these deals early and all of these contracts were like, why are they taking these deals? Danielle Hunter and Diggs and so many guys, Adam Thielen, and it was happening right as they were building this palatial facility in Minnesota and kind of revamping those ancillary parts of what it was like to go to work every day as a member of the Minnesota Vikings. And that's stuff where we have a hard time describing it, we have a hard time defining it, but it really does manifest in ways that actually do matter.
110%. No, the precedent is so big, but also, look, they were first in the NFLPA report card. Yep. I'm biased. I interned there for a little bit, but it's not a surprise. The rating comes out and you're like, yeah, it's a first-rate organization, even outside of football, but I think it all does kind of come back down and funnel down into the football team. It's probably a smart way to do business. Spend on coaches, spend on all these various things that aren't technically capped.
I know that was a long clip, but I hope you understood the reasoning for me putting it in. The point is that teams have ways to increase incentives for players to come and play with them that aren't cap-oriented, and the Buffalo Bills and Minnesota Vikings are two teams that have done this very well. When you factor that into the idea that rookies will probably be willing to play wherever, and it makes it feel like the draft isn't a necessary mechanism. Forcing players to go play ball in a specific area is not exactly as important as the draft makes it seem. So now that I'm finished talking about the parity aspect of the draft and the team balance location aspect of the draft, I want to talk about what it could look like if teams had to do, say, bidding wars on these players. First and foremost, it would need to be entertaining, right? Because the draft in itself is a spectacle. And I believe that's very possible, as does Bomani Jones, who said that you can televise signing day the same way that you may have televised the draft previously. It's not that hard, we can turn anything into a spectacle these days. But aside from the event itself, what would this actually do to NFL teams? Well, for starters, the recruiting process would probably be really interesting. These teams would try to show that they care about college players, spend a lot of time evaluating these individual talents more heavily, and upgrading team facilities and team resources to make their locations more and more enticing. In terms of trades, it could be interesting to see teams factor in rookie cap room into deals surrounding players that are already in the league in the same way that you would have factored in draft picks in years past. In terms of team building, passing, teams would probably need to be much more intentional if they want to build around the run game, which would be really cool. It would be the NBA equivalent of, say, building around Giannis if you want to get a guy like Bijan Robinson, who is a unique talent at the running back position. I would imagine that skill players as a whole would move a lot more around the league, seeing as they would be highly paid off rip, while positions that take longer to develop, such as, say, tight end or linebacker or lineman, would be quite a bit more stable, seeing as they need more time to grow. The quarterback position, I imagine, would be fascinating because some teams would be willing to spend up to half of their cap on a quarterback, while others may go the Brock Purdy, Russell Wilson, Tom Brady route, attempting to build an elite vehicle meant for winning rather than simply recruiting the best driver that's out there. I think we would see much more variance in team identities overall, and we could see a lot more about the way that these teams think about the game of football based on the way that they allocate their funds in this imaginary draft free agency. And before I wrap things up, I want to give my credit to the places where I found the best information on the topic of abolishing the NFL draft, if any of you are interested in learning more. First up is, of course, the Sumer Sports Podcast and the YouTube video made by Bomani Jones about the NFL draft. I can't recommend these enough. Jones lays things out in such a way that you can't believe you ever did support the event to begin with. The New York Intelligencer has a great article about sports drafts in general. S.M. Olivia wrote a phenomenal piece in the economics section of Reason.com about the NFL draft. Dalton Miller of Pro Football Network wrote a piece about how abolishing the draft could de-incentivize tanking. Oh, what a great idea that is. And the great PFT commenter wrote a piece all the way back in 2015 about this topic for SB Nation. So now that I've cited my sources, it's time for me to wrap things up and say that that's about all I've got. I'm not an economist, I'm not a mathematician, I'm not a seasoned GM, I'm a fourth-year college student majoring in journalism with a computer and a dream thinking out loud. Ultimately, like any other radical theory, it's reasonable to expect that this change would be gradual and over time. With the current power structure of the NFL institution, it's unlikely that we see a change as drastic as abolishing the draft ever. But if we do want to see a more pro-labor league with more players' rights, it all starts with a discussion. Because if you're like me, you understand that the NFL is nothing without its players, and quite frankly, the players deserve more fruit for their labor. It sucks to see some of the league's biggest stars so frustrated by the way that money works in the league as currently constructed, especially players of a position so fundamental, fun, and attractive as running back. I mean, for me, it was Adrian Peterson who made me fall in love with the game of football to begin with. Making the league more pro-labor is not an easy change to make, but I do believe that it's a necessary one. Whether or not you believe that abolishing the NFL draft is the ultimate necessary means to that end is up to you, but I do believe that keeping an open mind on the topic is a good place to start if we want to see progress in the movement that it represents. So let me know what you think, and thanks for watching.